Okay. Hello. Well, yesterday we took upon us brought forth. Right. And today, I wanted to get into verse 11, and it's part of brought forth. But now it defines grass, the herb yielding seed, fruit trees yielding fruit after his kind. So whose seed in itself upon the earth, and it was so. So we're going to get into what is grass. Okay, and we're going to start with the flesh, the solid. What do you eat that is grass? Well, it's bread. It's the wheat of the field, thrashed until certain parts of the wheat fall off. Then those parts are thrown up into the air. The wind, a breeze, is coming by, and it blows the husk away, the bad material, and the wheat is purified, and then it can be ground up and cooked into a bread. But here, it also talks about a tree. Now, what does a tree do for the flesh? It brings nutrients, the same as the grass, only in a different way. Bread is for strength, right? Bread, not strength, but energy, functions, stuff like that. Put sugars in your blood, and them sugars become energy. Well, if you don't have some kind of fruit, then you get sicknesses like scabies, stuff like that. So fruit is also an important part of a diet, right? Alright, so the flesh lives off of these things, right? It has to have them. But God says you can't live by bread alone. You do have to have water, right? Water is the main substance of our life. But we need bread as well for the flesh. And fruit is nice too, without the sicknesses. I wanted to get into what these are symbolic of according to Christ. I think I'll go with Christ first. And to Matthew chapter 13. And he has the seeds here. This is the parable of the wheat and the tare. Right? And Christ is explaining it here in verse 37. And he is explaining there's two people sowing the seed here in this parable, right? And this parable is talking about the beginning, and it's going to talk about grass, the wheat and the tare. Both are grass. One is very edible. The other is a tare. Now a tare and a wheat in a field, they grow up together, and they look the same. You can't tell them apart. It is only after they have ripened, one will turn white and one will turn black. And the tare is poisonous. And so you pull the tare up and out of the wheat. You don't want it in your wheat. It's pretty dangerous. And so, with this parable, you had to kind of have that in mind. And the disciples have asked him to explain this parable to them, right? And in 37, he answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed, That's the wheat, the good grass, is the Son of Man. Okay, so who planted you? If you're the wheat, it would be Jesus, right? The field is the world, right? So his seed in his wheat is planted throughout all the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, right? So you can see the wheat, right, are the children of the kingdom. But the tares are the children of the wicked one, right? The deceiver that came and deceived, right, the serpent. And we'll get into that in chapter 3 of Genesis, right? So we have two types of children in this world. The enemy that sowed them is the deceiver, the devil, right? So let me see here. Yeah, sometimes I can get that to pop up. Sometimes I can't. A slanderer, Satan, right? False accuser, a devil, a slanderer. He was cunning, right? We could go back to the serpent in chapter 3 of Genesis and see his description. He was deceptive. Okay? The harvest is the end of the world. And the reapers are the angels. Right? So who are going to be gathering the wheat and the tares? It's going to be God's workers, you know. But we see that we are the grass, right? So you have to see this as a spiritual side. Okay, so what consumption does God consume? And this is in spiritual. You're the wheat. You're the substance that he, consumes, right? But in a spiritual way. This is not a physical way. He does not delight in the deceiver's way, right? Now, who's going to send forth those workers of God? In 41, it's going to be the Son of Man, right? And in 40, as therefore the tares are gathered and burnt in the fire, right? So shall it be in the end of this world. The Son of Man shall send forth his angels, his ministries, his workers, and they shall gather out of his kingdom all that offend. Right? So who goes first? And then which do iniquity, and shall cast them into a furnace of fire. There shall be wailing and gashing of teeth. Then shall the righteous shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Who hath an ear, let him hear. Okay, so we have the understanding of how bread is important, right? And how we are that wheat that forms the bread. The body of Christ being that bread. A little bit deep there, but alright, so trees. We have an understanding of trees and how fruit is good for you, how for the flesh it can keep you from being sick. Apples, oranges, lemons, nuts. There's all kind of trees, right? Well, in the garden, they were told that they could eat of every tree except for, right, the tree of knowledge. The good and evil in verse 9 is actually added in the original text. It says the tree of knowledge. They were warned of this kind of knowledge. We don't know if it was a truthful knowledge or if it's a wicked knowledge. It really doesn't really say that I'm aware of. So, what is a tree? Well, I think Daniel describes a tree better than anybody that I know, right? This is Daniel in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, right? Where Nebuchadnezzar is seen as this great big tree, right? And it's his glory. It is his of what works he has built and done. He has caused people to rest under his branches and fed his people and gave comfort and made a very good way of life for these people. He's a little bit too proud of it. He thinks that he's done it alone, by himself. But that's not the tree. That's him. He gets a little bit too, high up there. But the tree itself, its description in 20, the tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached unto the heavens, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, right? So he wasn't wildered. What his offering to his people, he was a fair man, right? And the fruit thereof much, right? So fruit would represent like the spirit, like he didn't persecute or cause the people to mourn. His fruit was, happiness. And in it was meat for all. So there was a lot of strength, not just in Nebuchadnezzar, but there was a lot of strength in all his people, right? Under which the beast of the field dwelt. That's coming. And upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. So there was multi-levels, right? It is thou, O King, that art grown and become strong, for thy greatness is grown. So it's his greatness or his glory. And reachest unto heaven, and thy dominion, and that's another study coming, to the earth, to the end of the earth. The end of the earth there would have been at the tallest point, tower, and looking out. Those would be the end of the earth there, from my understandings. And whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven and saying, hew the tree down. Right? So this is the greatest man at this time there's ever been. And you see that he's very fair. He's very good to his people. They have rest under his branches. They have a very good life. But his tree is fixing to get knocked down and destroyed. But the root, the stump will be left so the root can grow out of it. And so his kingdom will get restored back to him. But he got a swelling head. He thinks too highly of himself. And God is going to show him that he's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And he did so. It's a good story if you want to read it. Let's see. What did we miss? Now, this is 1 Corinthians chapter 1. And basically, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 22, it talks about what trees people rest under. What trees do we believe in? Whose glory do we glorify in? Okay? And Paul here is talking about Jews require a sign, right? So they're physical. If they see a sign and it's a miracle, then they know it'll be true, right? And the Greeks, they seek after wisdom. It's where your medical field comes from. It's where, their knowledge, it comes from the Greeks, right? And that's what they trust in, and that's what they are under, that tree of knowledge. Goes back to Genesis chapter 2 and Genesis chapter 3, right? But Christ, right, just as it was shown to Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4, is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Are the Greek signs great? Yes. Are the Jews' signs great? Yes. Is the knowledge of the Greek great? Yes. But it's nothing to God's knowledge. And that's what Paul will get into, right? The crucifixion of Christ is the greatest. That's supposed to be our umbrella. 24. But unto them which are called, both Jews and Greek, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men. Right? So that would be the wisdom of the Greeks. That knowledge of truth, or tree of knowledge. That's why I kind of went here. And the weaknesses of God stronger than men, right? And God He puts it straight here. You have to just deal with that however you want to deal with that. I think that's all I have. I don't think I've got any other chapters. But this is something to think on. What are the grass? Well, the grass is the children of God. What are trees? It is the greatness of men, right? There is two trees. There's two olive trees, right? And you can, that's a whole different study there. But it's interesting to get into this kind of stuff, because when you hear Christ talk about these things, to have these understandings, then it makes more sense. So that's why they're very important to me.